The sun hung low over the frontier plains, bleeding gold across the dust as if the land itself sensed the injustice unfolding. And at the center of that wide, merciless clearing stood a young woman named Clara, wrists bound and stretched between two dead trees like a criminal waiting for judgment she did not deserve. The townsfolk of Red Hollow circled her with cold eyes, dust swirling around their boots as they shouted accusations of theft, deceit, wickedness, none of which were true. But truth mattered little in a place where fear and rumor carried more weight than evidence. For Clara had stumbled upon secrets she was never meant to see, secrets belonging to men who wore badges by day and turned predators by night. And now, those same men hid behind the angry mob, pushing them like cattle toward violence. Clara's blue dress, once neat and modest, was torn at the hem where the crowd had dragged her. And though her arms trembled with exhaustion and the rope bit deep into her skin, she kept her chin lifted, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her fear. But fear was there, shaking in her chest, burning in her throat, because she knew no one was coming. No one had even dared question the marshal when he ordered her tied up and claimed she was a danger to the town. And Clara wondered if this lonely stretch of sand and deadwood would be the last thing she would ever see. The marshal strode forward, smug in his authority, his hand hovering over the pistol at his hip as if he desperately wanted an excuse to use it. And he leveled a cruel smile at Clara as he announced to the crowd that justice would be served by sundown unless she confessed. Though everyone knew this was not about confession but silence. Silencing her from ever telling what she heard the marshal and his men discuss behind the saloon. Plans for seizing land, forcing families out, taking power that didn't belong to them. Clara whispered a prayer, her voice barely audible over the commotion. And for a moment the world seemed to pause, as if the horizon held its breath. Then, suddenly, the stillness shattered beneath the pounding thunder of hooves approaching at full speed. Heads turned, dust rose in plumes, and through the storm of grit and sun emerged a lone rider, dressed in rugged leather, his long coat whipping behind him like a banner of defiance. He rode a black stallion, powerful enough to part the crowd by its presence alone, and the man on its back carried a fury in his eyes that froze even the boldest onlookers. It was Colt Braddock, the reclusive cowboy who lived beyond the canyon ridge. A man who kept to himself and rarely came to town. A man whose name was spoken with equal parts fear and respect. And though Clara had never expected him to come, a single tear escaped her eye when she saw him, because she remembered the day he'd found her lost on the mountain trail and guided her home without asking for thanks. Colt pulled his horse to a stop before the marshal, the animal snorting and pawing the ground as its rider swung down with the grace of a man who'd lived his life in the saddle. And Colt's hand rested casually but confidently on the grip of his revolver as he surveyed the scene, his jaw clenching when he saw Clara tied and barely able to stand. "Untie her," Colt said, his voice low, gravelly, and carrying an authority the marshal's voice never had. But the marshal only laughed and spread his arms in mock innocence, claiming this was town business and the cowboy had no right to interfere. His men nodded in agreement, gripping their rifles a little tighter. Yet they all took a single step back when Colt slowly turned his head and looked at them one by one, his gaze as sharp as a blade and twice as dangerous. "I said, untie her," he repeated, and this time the quiet that followed was so heavy it pushed the crowd into silence, the kind that made even the wind hesitate. Colt's eyes narrowed, and he added in a voice that chilled every spine in Red Hollow, "Touch her again, and I." The marshal's smirk wavered, but pride and fear of losing control pushed him to try and stand firm. He claimed Clara was a thief, an enemy to the town, a liar who threatened the peace, and that the cowboy was risking his life by interfering. But Colt took a single step forward, his boot sinking into the dust. And in that moment the marshal realized something chilling. He couldn't push Colt the way he pushed the crowd. This was a man who'd survived outlaw ambushes, border raids, and wilderness storms, a man who didn't bluff, and a man who would gladly send every corrupt lawman in Red Hollow to their graves before letting them hurt an innocent woman. Colt reached for his revolver, not pulling it fully, but enough that the marshals saw the intent. And one by one the marshal's men lowered their weapons, muttering excuses and stepping aside, leaving their leader trembling with anger he no longer had the power to express. With a reluctant growl, the marshal cursed and motioned for his men to cut Clara free. But Colt didn't wait. He strode forward, blade drawn from his belt, and sliced the ropes himself, catching Clara in his arms as her legs buckled beneath her. For the first time since dawn, Clara felt safe, held by someone who saw her not as a burden or a threat, but as a human being worth protecting. Yet she could feel Colt's heart pounding with restrained rage as he glared at the marshal, warning him with a look that promised future reckoning. Clara whispered a hoarse thank you, but Colt only shook his head and whispered back that she didn't owe him anything, that nobody should ever have to face the cruelty she had endured. And he gently lifted her onto his horse before mounting behind her, one arm steadying her as he turned the stallion toward the open plains. The townspeople watched in stunned silence as the cowboy carried Clara away, the last light of sunset igniting the dust in a blazing trail behind them. And though the marshal shouted for anyone to stop them, no one moved. Deep down, every person there knew the truth. Justice wasn't with the marshal anymore. It rode away with Colt Braddock. And as Clara leaned weakly against the cowboy's chest, she realized her life had been spared not just by chance, but by courage, a courage she hoped every soul listening to her story would remember, because strength can rise from the most unexpected places. If you felt the power in this story, don't forget to like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Your support is what keeps these stories alive.